Well, a couple months ago, our youngest son came to the men's Bible study that we have on Tuesday nights. And after the Bible study, walked up to me and revealed that he had a new tattoo that he had gotten the previous weekend when he had gone to visit his siblings in Boise. Now, we're not a big tattoo family, but as tattoos go, this one was basically unobjectionable. It was a cross on his forearm, and coming up the upright portion of the cross was a verse, and that verse was Hebrews 12:5. Now, I have a pretty good recollection of scripture references, but that one escaped me. I was going Hebrews 12:5, Hebrews 12:5. I couldn't call it to mind, but we had a short conversation about his tattoo and then talked about other stuff. Later, I went and looked up Hebrews 12:5, and here's what Hebrews 12:5 said. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. Well, I thought, that's kind of an interesting verse to put on your arm. Well, it turns out that wasn't the verse he wanted on his arm. The verse he wanted on his arm was Hebrews 12:2, which is an admonition for Christians to fix their eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of their faith, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So that's the verse that he wanted on his arm. Now, whether he told the tattoo artist the wrong verse or whether the tattoo artist just wrote the wrong verse, no one knows. But I informed Nathaniel that it was probably divinely orchestrated so that he would have this reminder on his arm that there was benefit to the Lord's discipline, and by implication also benefit to the discipline that he had endured when he was living under the same roof as his mother and I. So all of that to say that discipline is an important topic, and it is what we are going to address today on Parenting for the Long Run. We are going where angels fear to tread. So join us and see if you do not benefit from this important topic.
I'm all in. Push your chips to the middle. I'm all in for the cards as they may. I'm all in. Push your chips to the middle. I'm all in. Go broke or get paid.
Well, welcome back to our podcast, Parenting for the Long Run. We are glad you are with us. We are going to venture where angels fear to tread today and talk about the issue of disciplining our children. You may notice my hair is a little bit shorter. The reason it's shorter is I lost a bet with my junior high cross-country girls. Turns out that if you tell junior high cross-country runners that if they win a race, they'll be able to cut your hair, that is a big motivation. So they didn't quite win the race, but they ran so well. I had a hard time denying them the joy of humiliating their coach. And, they didn't do a bad job. There was an X and a C on my head. I might put a picture of that here in his final production of this. But it was a good time. It's having a little time keeping my hair looking combed. My son had some stuff that was hair tonic, and I'm looking at this. It wasn't tonic, it's gel of some sort. And it said, for that disheveled look. I was like, I have the disheveled look. I need the heveled look. So I haven't found anything yet to give me the heveled look. So until then, this is what I'm stuck with. So before we get started on this controversial topic, let me open our time in prayer. Father, this is an issue that many parents struggle with. I pray that you would speak through me and that I would speak only those words that you would have me speak and that they would be of benefit to the people who hear. Amen. So, Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines discipline as, quote, training that corrects, molds, or perfects the mental faculties or moral character. So that is a laudable goal, and actually one that every parent should adopt. So when we are thinking about how do we discipline our children, how do we get them to the point where they will be able to deal with the issues that life throws them in a reasonable manner, and also just be pleasant to be around, not only as adults, but before that, when they're kids. So we have to come up with some strategy that will enable us to do that. And whatever strategy we come up with needs to be consistent with reality. By that, I mean the principles that are foundational to that strategy have to jive with how people are designed. And I talked about that in one of the first podcasts, the assumptions that my wife and I used in disciplining our kids and in raising them up. And just briefly, I will go back over those. The first one is that our children are made in the image of God. That is, they have an intellect, they have an eternal soul, they are capable of making moral assessments, and they are also capable of considerable logic. So they can make connections between behavior that brings about one result and behavior that brings about a different result, and change their behavior accordingly. So that's the first assumption. The second assumption is that, contrary to what many sociologists and psychologists teach in our colleges today, children are not naturally good. Children inherited a rebellious streak from their very first grandparents, Adam and Eve, who rebelled against God in the Garden of Eden and told God, we are going to do things our way, not your way. And that is basically the attitude of every child that comes down the birth canal. And so if you do not have a parenting strategy consistent with that assumption, you are going to be frustrated. I'm sorry, but it's just not going to go well for you. And then one assumption that I didn't talk about earlier, but which I should mention here, is the assumption that there are moral standards that sit outside of human existence. That is, God has ordained principles that are consistent with his character, which sit in judgment of all human behavior. It doesn't matter what your child thinks. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what governing authorities think. That we will all be judged by that standard. And you see this at work all the time. As C.S. Lewis pointed out, if you are standing in line and someone who walks into the establishment and steps to the front of the line, what do people who are waiting patiently in line say? They say, hey, you can't cut in line. And what does the person who cut in line say? They don't say, what standard are you basing that upon? No, they almost inevitably come up with some reason why the standard of fair play doesn't apply to them in that situation. That is, by their argument, they are acknowledging that a standard does exist, but that it is being misapplied. So that will come into play as we raise our children. How should you discipline your children? Well, the first thing that you as parents need to do is agree on a strategy. Okay, whatever strategy you're going to implement, you have to be on the same page, because if you're not, your children are going to exploit that. They're going to play one parent against the other, and they're also going to be frustrated themselves because of the inconsistency that is exhibited by the father and the mother. Okay, so get on the same page. That's the very first step. Okay, so what page should that be? I'll tell you what page I think you should be on here in a second, but let me give you a couple alternatives, parenting philosophies. The first one is titled by advocates, Gentle Parenting. And gentle parenting, I'm trying not to be too derisive in my tone of voice here, but it is a little difficult for me, I will admit. The gentle parenting, and the article that I will link in the show notes, is based upon 4 principles: empathy, understanding, respect, and boundaries. And parents need to get on the same level with their child, and they also need to validate their quote unquote big emotions. So you would may say, well, I mean, some of that sounds good. Maybe all of it sounds good to you. What's wrong with empathy? What's wrong with understanding? What's wrong with respect? And what's wrong with boundaries? Well, the problem is, as I have seen it implemented, it tends to work in the wrong direction. There are many behaviors and many emotions displayed by many people that are not worthy of either empathy or understanding. And surely allowing kids to display their big emotions is a bad idea. You go on YouTube, you can see video after video. If you type in the search phrase, teenager gets tased by police officer. Well, there is example after example of teenagers who were displaying their big emotions in an environment where big emotions are not permitted, and it did not go well for them. The same is true in the workplace. I have worked with people who had a problem controlling their emotions, and they displayed their big emotions in the workplace, and I think without exception, they all stalled in their career because people could not trust them to control their emotions and their mouth when they needed to. And so they were not going to be granted any authority that might reflect poorly on the institution because they blew their top or spouted off and said something they shouldn't have said. Gentle parenting, I mean, it sounds good. It sounds so enlightened, but it is a recipe for disaster. I'm not sure if this young woman was an advocate of gentle parenting or not, but I have observed her on a number of different occasions at a cross-country meet. And at one cross-country meet, her daughter was probably 3 years old, maybe 4 years old, and she set her daughter down, and her daughter immediately started to run off down this parking lot. Well, she didn't even bother calling her daughter because she knew that her daughter would not respond. She chased after her daughter. Her daughter was running behind probably 6 parked cars before the mother caught her. Well, any one of those cars could have had a driver in it and backed up and killed that little girl. That was not advantageous either for the mother or for the little girl. The last time I saw this mother, she came to the cross-country meet without her little girl, and I expect part of the reason for that was because the little girl is just unpleasant to be around. Gentle parenting is a recipe for raising unholy terrors, and that is the long and the short of it. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is this model called FAFO parenting. And I will paraphrase here for the sake of our PG rating. FAFO parenting stands for screw around and find out. Well, in this model, you allow children to suffer or benefit from the consequences of their actions. And in the article that you'll find linked in the show notes, a mother talks about how she told her son, if you squirt me with that squirt gun, it's not going to go well for you. And when her son squirted her with the squirt gun, she took him and grabbed him and threw him in the lake. Well, that was all kind of in good fun. The problem is, what about other more serious situations? What about that situation with the little girl running down the parking lot? So do we just let her suffer the natural consequences of her actions? That seems, on the face of it, preposterous, and it is preposterous. So no, we don't do that. Okay, so we impose parental consequences. Well, what do those parental consequences look like? Are they dependent upon whether or not the parent is in a good mood or a bad mood? Well, that just is a recipe for anxiety on the part of the child, because they never know whether the consequences of their actions are going to be met with severity or leniency. So I think that too is a poor model of child rearing, largely because of the inconsistency in it. So what model did Laura and I use? Well, before I tell you what model we use, let me tell you what you have to, the assumption you have to adopt in order to use this. And that is that you are in charge as a parent. That idea is kind of foreign to many modern parenting experts, but it is taught in the scriptures. It is supported by the U.S. Constitution. And as far as I know, it is reaffirmed in the laws of every state in our union. Parents not only have the right, but they also have the responsibility for taking charge of their children. Now, you may say, okay, well, that's pretty fundamental. Why do you bring that up? Well, because some parents may understand that intellectually, but their practice contradicts their intellectual assent. That is, they behave as if they are not in charge. So understand you are in charge. Now, here is what Laura and I did in our parenting, and we have seen other parents who have done this, and it has worked well. The first thing that we did was we told our kids from a very early age, hey, when we are giving you instructions, you need to look at us, and when we're done, you need to say, yes, Mom, or yes, Dad, depending upon who is giving you the instructions. And the reason we did that is kind of twofold. One, we want our kids to pay attention to us. And so if we require them to look at us and attend to what we're saying, then that is a good first step in that process. And then replying, yes, Mom, or yes, Dad, short circuits the natural tendency that each of us have, myself included, of coming up with excuses as to why I should not obey when I am told to do something. Because I can come up with immediately a whole list of reasons why I should not undertake the endeavors that I have been given by a person in authority. But if I have to respond, yes, sir, then that pretty much is the end of the discussion. And so it is with our children when we ask them to do that. Now I say that, but there is a problem. And if we are not careful, we can teach our kids just to mimic the words, yes, Mom, yes, Dad, they may have no intention of actually obeying us. And so that brings in the second prong of our strategy, and that is we told our kids that we were going to ask them to do something exactly one time. And if they did not obey promptly, they were going to get a spanking. Now, this is the point where parenting experts, particularly parenting experts who speak with a British accent, have their head explode. But the evidence that I have seen, anecdotal evidence, indicates that spanking your children works. It is very effective, and it has significant advantages over any other approach. Let me give you the quick rundown of the benefits that I think that judicious spanking has for you and for your children. The first is, it is humane. It is humane in the literal sense of that word. You are treating your child as a human. Your child is not an animal that needs to be caged because they cannot control their behavior or their emotions. Your child is definitely not an animal that needs to be tranquilized because they are incapable of controlling their fidgeting. Your child is human, and they can exercise self-control when taught to do so. Does this mean they will always exercise self-control? Of course not. But in many situations, the day-to-day circumstances that arise, they can control their emotions and alter their behavior to fit with the circumstance. So that is the first benefit, that it is humane. The second is it is expeditious. When I worked in the bond selling business at a major university here in the United States, we would have to go through all these documents that would outline the guarantees we were making to the investors who were buying our bonds. And usually within one of the first clauses, there was this statement, time is of the essence. Now, I'm not sure what all the legal implications of that are, but my summary of that and my understanding of it was this: if there's a problem, deal with it judiciously and quickly. That is, don't postpone the solution. And spanking deals with misbehavior very expeditiously. Your child misbehaves, you spank them, tell them why they are getting a spanking and what the behavior you expect of them is, and the issue is over with. Now, you may have to end up disciplining them again later, maybe later the same day, maybe later within 5 minutes. But each act of disobedience is dealt with expeditiously and then put behind you so that the child can move on with their life and you can move on with your life. You do not engage in ongoing negotiations with your child as to whether your child is going to obey or not. You are the one who determines what your child's going to do. If they don't do it, there is a consequence associated with that. And then finally, I'll deal with these three together. It promotes peace, it promotes joy, and it promotes freedom. What do I mean by those? It promotes peace. Your household will be more peaceful. There will be more tranquility. You will not be constantly engaged in negotiations or nagging or cajoling to try to get your children to do what you know they need to do, because they will learn rather quickly that if they don't do what they're supposed to do, there is a consequence associated with that, and they will develop the habit of obeying. So that's the peaceful part. The joyful part is you will enjoy your children much more, and your children will enjoy you much more. Now you may say, how could my children enjoy me much more if I am spanking them? Well, part of that lies in the consistency with which you implement the strategy. So if you are faithful and consistent in doing what you tell your children you're going to do, everyone knows the ground rules. And they know that if they obey, they are going to be rewarded. It may just be rewarded with your good pleasure and a thank you on your part, or it may be that there's some other word you find appropriate in those instances. But they're not going to be surprised when they disobey and they get a spanking. That consistency and your faithfulness in implementing it will give your kids confidence in you and build their ability to put trust in you because they know how you're going to react. The last one is it promotes freedom. As you begin to develop discipline in your kids, you will see that you can kind of loosen the reins somewhat, and your kids can enjoy more freedoms. You know that they can run off along the playground, and when you call them, they will come back. You don't have to keep them within a few steps so that you can intercept them before they get into trouble. And so they will begin to enjoy those freedoms more, and you will be able to enjoy the freedoms as well as you see them beginning to blossom as children and later as teenagers and adults. So those are the benefits of spanking. Now, I know some of you probably want to burn me in effigy here. If you burn me in effigy, please keep it in effigy. But let me make a quick defense of corporal punishment. Arguments against corporal punishment are typically twofold. I'm going to simplify. The first is that they make no change in people's behavior. That flies in the face of all the evidence I have seen in over 60 years of being on this earth. When I was in elementary school, the town I lived in initially was a town of about 1,200 people. It was like the stereotypical Leave It to Beaver town. Mother, father, 3 or 4 kids, and the parents either worked at for the government. The U.S. government had a hydroelectric plant where we lived, or they worked for the school system. Those were the 2 big employers in town. Shortly after we moved there, they built a coal-fired generating station. And so our school went from 200 kids from elementary school all the way up to high school, maybe 300, to well over 500 in the high school, and just classrooms that were bursting the seams in elementary school. And it was basically a modern day gold rush. And we would be sitting in class, and a new kid would come into class almost every day. And the kids who had come in on previous days would see this kid come in, and they'd say, "Oh, hey, Don, how are you?" And they all knew each other because they'd been at the last gold rush town. Well, that socioeconomic situation created a lot of havoc among families. My mom was a school teacher, and she would shake her head at night because one kid's mother had left her husband and married some other kid's father, and that mother had married another guy. And so there was just all of this familial turmoil in the people who had come from the previous gold rush town. That kind of led to considerable behavioral problems, you would think. But really, compared to the behavioral problems I see in schools today as a substitute teacher, we had very few issues. And the reason for that was because the teachers could spank the kids. We had a 5th grade teacher. Her name was Miss Schwartz, and Miss Schwartz was drop dead gorgeous. She just mesmerized all the 5th grade boys. And of course, 5th grade boys show their affection for their teacher by acting up. And one kid in particular acted up and kind of stepped over the line, and Miss Schwartz called him to the front of the class, had him bend over, grab his ankles, and she took a paddle and she lifted him probably 2 inches off the ground with that paddle. All of us looked at that and said, important safety note, don't mess with Miss Schwartz. And no more behavioral problems. It was that simple. So I have seen many parents who have implemented judicious spanking, and their children are, without exception, much more enjoyable to be around than people who practice some type of permissive parenting and try to use other means of cajoling their kids into obedience. So that's the first argument against it, that it doesn't change behavior. I think that flies in the face of common sense and the evidence. The second is that it just teaches your children that violence is a solution. Again, this is contradictory to the assumptions that we talked about earlier. The third assumption that I said I hadn't mentioned before, that there is a standard that sits in judgment over people. Well, our kids understand that. And they understand that you as a parent are in charge, that you have a moral obligation to be looking out for their welfare, and they have a moral obligation to obey you. They understand that. And so when you use spanking in your parenting efforts, they understand that that is an appropriate use of authority. And so you aren't being abusive to them. You are just being judicial, in essence, in your application of spanking. Oh, you engaged in this behavior. Here is why this behavior is wrong. The sentence is a swat. They see that, they say, okay, that is a legitimate use of authority, and we move on. They don't say, oh, well, my parents use violence because they're bigger than me. When I get older, I'm going to use violence against other people. No, I have never seen that manifest itself in children, in the hundreds of children that I have seen whose parents use spanking as a discipline strategy. So that's what Laura and I used. It was very effective for us. And when you have 10 kids in your household, you need a strategy that requires minimal energy and maximum effectiveness. And that strategy worked like a charm. So if you're thinking, okay, well, maybe I'll try that. Let me give you a warning, okay? If you are going to try it, you are going to meet with resistance. If you have been using some other discipline strategy, because your children are not just going to go, oh, that's what we're going to do? Okay, we're on board with that, because they want to do what they want to do. They are selfish. They are trying to assert dominance in their relationship with you. So I had a discussion with a young parent who was facing this issue, and I had told him, okay, this is what I think you should do. And he came back to me and he says, well, it's not working. I said, why not? He says, well, my son just doesn't get it. I mean, what do you mean he doesn't get it? Well, I told him to do something and he didn't do it, so I spanked him. And he still didn't do it, so I spanked him. And he still didn't do it, so I spanked him. And so then I just gave up. I didn't say this, but what I was thinking was, okay, what you just taught your child was that if he holds out long enough, he will win. That's a bad thing to teach them. What I did say was, I'm guessing that you are not spanking your child hard enough. And he's like, oh, no, I am doing that. I said, yeah, I'm just not convinced. Now, I'm not advocating that you hit your child hard, but people tend to be, particularly women, tend to be very tentative in their spanking. And so we kind of left it at that. That's where the conversation ended. Next time I saw him, he came back to me. He says, I got to thinking about what you had said, and I realized I was being too tentative. That's my word, not his. But that was the essence of what he said. And so I applied a little bit more force, a little pop on the leg, and suddenly it was like, okay, I'll obey. Well, that was exciting to hear that, and it was good. It wasn't just good for this young man, it was good for the little boy, and it was also very good for the little boy's mother. Because, men, I will tell you this, if your kids act up with you, they are really going to act up with your wife. And your job is to ensure that they don't. So, if you implement this strategy, you have to realize, hey, we're going to stick with it. And if you do that, I am sure, I won't say I guarantee, but I am sure that you will see that you have much more peace, tranquility, joy, and freedom in your household, and you will enjoy your kids more, and other people will enjoy being around your kids more. So it's a difficult thing to do, but the benefits of it are long-lasting and far-reaching. So I would encourage you to undertake that endeavor. If you have questions, you have comments, if you want to burn me an effigy, you can put all that in the show notes. I will be happy to respond to some of those questions. If you found this helpful, I would encourage you to share it with other parents or soon-to-be parents, and like and subscribe to our podcast, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you.